Joining me now is Kit Cabello and Daniel Luepker. They are with Hard Lens Media, hardlensmedia.com. They're covering Chicago and the mayor race in Chicago. Welcome, guys. How you doing?
Really well. Good to be back.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, good to have you guys. So let's do two things because a lot of folks in the country don't know about what's happening in the mayor's race in Chicago. First, how many people were in the race before the runoff, and what happened in the first round?
Good.
Well, here's an interesting thing. This is the first time ever, in the fourth time in Chicago's history, 100 years, where the current incumbent, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, or any other incumbent mayor did not enter the race. So we had about approximately, at one point, 21 incumbents, or not 21 candidates, but it got dwindled down to about 14 mayoral candidates. And then finally, at the end result on February 26th, we had Laura Lightfoot and then former Cook County Board President Tony Prepwinkle make it to the final two, where they will eventually, the city will decide who will be our next mayor on April 2nd.
So I'm not as familiar with all of Chicago's politics. So Daniel, let me go to you. Before we got to the final two, who did you guys think was the pick for the establishment? I'm sure they had a couple, but like the one they thought was the one they wanted to win most. And who was the most progressive in the race?
So I think you actually interviewed the most progressive person in the race, which was Troy LaRiviere. We very much liked him. He didn't get the funding he needed, and he was counting on a CTU endorsement, which went to Prepwinkle. So he withdrew earlier, and I think that the obvious pick for the establishment was actually Daley, because there's never enough Daleys in the city. You have Old Man Daley, who ruled the city like a king for decades, and then his son ruled for several more decades, and they were ready for another seat on the throne. We were expecting him to actually meet the runoff. There were so many people in the race, we knew no one was going to get over 50%, which would end the race right there. Instead, in Chicago, you have runoffs if you have under 50%. And he actually finished in third and is not even eligible for the race. And we're left with two very interesting candidates. And of course, at Chicago, we like to say it's the most corrupt city in a state. And so all candidates are, at this point that we're in the race now, were flawed, and that continues to be the case. But we are now looking at a case that I think it'll be able to break down, where we have probably the two, either one of them would be the second most progressive mayor in the city's history. But from the country's perspective, that's not saying a whole lot.
Yeah, it's very important to note that when we look at the two candidates, Laura Lightfoot, she hasn't been in office or been elected to any kind of Chicago office, but she's sat on a lot of administrative boards, bureaucratic boards. She's also a lawyer. Most notably, some of the boards that she has sat on had to deal with the Chicago Police Department. And I know it's controversial, but she has been incremental in at least trying to bring some form of justice and reforms to a lot of the bureaucracies that are in Chicago politics. Now, as for Tony Prepwinkle, it's much more of an interesting story. See, she was the Cook County Board President and was elected in 2009. And during her administration, she has had a lot of ties with some of the key players in Chicago politics, most notably Ed Burke, who is also a political ally of Madigan. And if you haven't been keeping in touch with current Chicago news, Ed Burke is being investigated by the FBI due to the fact that he wanted to extort a local Burger King for various reasons. But what's interesting about that Burger King is that the same Burger King that also caught the Laquan McDonald shooting early on in 2015. So there's that issue that Tony Prepwinkle has to deal with. But the most damaging thing to Tony Prepwinkle is that during her time, Chicago has had a lot of regressive tax policies. Let's talk about the soda tax, a very regressive tax that was being implemented on the city of Chicago. And during her administration, for the Cook County Board Assessor was Joe Barrios, who is the example of neoliberalism and nepotism. Most of the people within his administration were his direct family members and relatives. And the problem with the Office of Cook County Assessor is that it deals with all the taxes and property assessments all across Cook County. And Cook County is now the most heavily taxed county in the state of Illinois. And if you look at what's in the downtown area of the city of Chicago, all the law firms and major businesses got nice tax incentives and tax breaks, whereas the rest of the burden was then put on the working class communities, most notably on the south and west side areas of Chicago. And then finally, under Joe Barrios' administration as Cook County Board Assessor, there was a clear lack of transparency. So one of the questions that I want to ask at least Toni Preckwinkle is, what did she know about Joe Barrios, and how did this kind of lack of transparency continue as she was the Cook County Board president? And then just to add on to that, we did a live stream about this some time ago where allied to Toni Preckwinkle, Representative Martin, was going to propose a bill that would actually call for the office of Cook County Assessor to be appointed rather than voted in. And then Laura Lightfoot actually challenged that idea of why should this office be appointed. And finally, the new Cook County Assessor, Fritz Kragi, who's from our Revolution, Illinois, now has the monumental task of actually trying to find out what exactly Joe Barrios did during his time as Cook County Board Assessor.
So it's very important for this that Fritz was brought in. We've talked to him a bunch of times. He seems and he has the power to do so, to really reassess all of the city with a formula that they have. And it's very concerning to us because from our point of view, he is a very legitimate progressive person in that office. And to hear an ally of Preckwinkle, who of course had very close ties to Barrios and a lot of the other city, threaten his position was a big deal to us. And that was very recent.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a slightly absurd question to you guys in a second, so that'll be fun. But I just want to make note of how absurd Chicago is. Like, who goes after one Burger King? What a weirdly corrupt thing to do.
Okay, so let me go back to what Kid said with the Laquan McDonald tape. I think that tape is a perfect summation of what is wrong with the city. You see in that video that you've covered that it's the abuse of power within Chicago, but it also represents, with that Burger King that's directly in the background, the abuse of power of the aldermen and how they act. Generally speaking, the aldermen have two main roles. One of them is to be a rubber stamp for the mayor and whatever he says. And the second is that they're in charge of zoning. So that's why a lot of realtors give a lot of money to their campaigns, and then they just get whatever they want. In Burke's case, he's used to pushing around small mom and pop restaurants, and he didn't quite think that he's a large fish in a lake, and Burger King is a very large fish in the ocean. And so from their point of view, they have the money to fight this. And it turns out that Danny Solis, another alderman, was in connection with this, wearing a wire for the FBI. So what we see nationally is, of course, happening locally in the city. We're not unused to this. This is, again, Chicago, the most corrupt city in the state.
And it's also very important to note, too, that Ed Burke himself actually did donate before the FBI launched its investigation or made the people aware that they were investigating him, actually did donate a sizable amount of funds towards a Toni Preckwinkle campaign. Now, to the Preckwinkle campaign's credit, they did return those funds back, but it leads a lot of questions that many people in Chicago want to know is, well, if you're going to take that kind of money from Ed Burke, well, what else did Ed Burke do for you? Because we all seen the impact of money in politics. And if you're going to give somebody money, well, then what are they going to ask you to do?
And in a big sense, in a very real sense, to be mayor of Chicago is to be king of Chicago. More than any other city in any other state, even including New York, probably including the mayor of DC, president, mayor of LA. Chicago mayor is the person who has the most control, direct control, over any amount of domestic issues in the country, because it's really what the mayor says goes, and that's how Chicago is.
Well, that might change though if a progressive wins, and then all of a sudden the aldermen are not going to listen as much, etc. So let's go to the heart of this issue. Look, the good news is William Daley lost. So yes, we're tired of the same old Daleys winning, tired of the establishment pick winning. He worked in the Obama administration. He was a very corporate Democrat, worked in Wall Street. Super happy to be rid of him. And Chicago, either way, is going to have the first African-American woman mayor. Wonderful, okay? So, but it sounds like in terms of who's more progressive, and you guys know this better, way better than I do, you guys seem to be saying Lori Lightfoot is a little bit more progressive than Toni Preckwinkle. Am I hearing that right?
It's a difficult question to answer, but in theory, yes. And I would say that I think it's a huge deal and it's a great win that in the city of Chicago, the most corrupt city in the state, we have two mayoral candidates trying to get to a runoff, and they're out competing each other to say who is the most progressive of the two. I think that alone is a great victory in the city.
Yeah, and another thing too to take away from this is that while this was the second lowest turnout in Chicago's electoral history, there was enough people to actually break away from the polling data that was showing Prepwinkle and Daley as being in the runoff. And the very fact that Laura Lightfoot was a surprise winner really says a lot, because it should be noted that Laura Lightfoot was one of the early entries into the Chicago mayoral race, and it was only after Mayor Rahm Emanuel made his announcement that he wasn't going to run was when Daley, Gary Chico, Susan Mendoza, and Tony Prepwinkle announced that they would run for Chicago mayor.
Okay, I'm gonna skip the absurd question. I was gonna ask you to rate him from 1 to 10, but you guys are clear enough. Lightfoot's more progressive. The fact that she was a surprise winner is also a good thing. That means the establishment was not backing her, and then the people did. So those are all good things. I hear you. Daniel, I know we're pretty much out of time, but I know you wanted to say one quick thing about TYT. That's what I was told.
Oh yeah, I wanted to thank you for having us on a second time. We actually, last time we were on, we had a shout out to people to see if anyone wanted that was in the city that wanted to help us out. We actually had a lot of people reach out to us after that, including one person, Yasmin, who has become our marketing director, and she's been doing a fantastic job. And I really wanted to thank you and the network for really making that connection possible. And I do want to make the same call again to the TYT Army. If there's anyone out there in the city of Chicago that's tired of the same old, and wants to report change, be there for change, really see this mayoral race, but also how this is all going to play out in the primaries coming forward. We just covered Bernie Sanders at Navy Pier a couple days ago. Reach out to us on either our Facebook, hardlensmedia.com on Facebook, or at hardlensmedia.com. We have a link for you.
That's awesome. I love it. People power. And no matter who wins the race, I'm positive that Kit and Daniel will hold them accountable and make sure that they're on the right path. So I love that you guys started this in Chicago. Thank you for joining us again. And one more time, everybody, hardlensmedia.com. Check it out. Thank you guys.
See you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.